Welcome back to our channel. Today we bring you an incredible story full of drama, suspense, and shocking twists that will keep you hooked until the very end. It all begins in a luxurious restaurant where a billionaire CEO is suddenly attacked by a group of men in front of everyone. Just when it seems like he's about to be humiliated and defeated, something extraordinary happens. A seemingly ordinary waitress, someone nobody ever noticed, steps forward and reveals a hidden talent that leaves the entire crowd stunned. What was supposed to be a quiet dinner turns into a tense showdown, and her unexpected intervention changes everything. What is this hidden talent, and how will it impact the billionaire CEO's fate? Stay with us until the end to uncover this emotional, thrilling, and jaw-dropping story. And if you love dramatic stories with shocking twists like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single episode. At La Belle Étoile, the weekend nights always shimmered with golden lights. The clink of silverware on porcelain plates blended with the smooth notes of a jazz piano played by an old man who looked like he'd spent his entire life preparing for this one performance. The restaurant was packed. Businessmen, artists, even a few politicians, all eager to be seen and to be noticed. At the center table sat a man in a deep navy suit, crisp white collar and a gold watch that glistened under the chandelier. He was none other than Richard Hamilton, the billionaire CEO that the Wall Street Journal had once dubbed the steel shark of Wall Street. He sat upright, calm and composed, as if the entire restaurant belonged to him. With just his presence, he drew whispers of envy and admiration. "That's Richard," someone muttered. "He just signed a multi-billion-dollar deal last week." But not every pair of eyes in the room was friendly. From the far corner, 5 burly men, shirts unbuttoned, tattoos curling around their wrists, eyes dark with intent, watched Richard closely. Their murmurs ended in bitter chuckles, their stares sharpened like knives. No one noticed them, no one except a young waitress. Her name was Emma. With her hair tied neatly back and a polite smile on her face, she glided through tables, carrying a tray of wine. But her sharp eyes caught the dangerous glances. She knew instantly. These weren't just diners. They were predators waiting for the moment to strike. Her heart quickened. Something bad was about to happen. Just as Richard raised his glass of wine, a chair screeched across the floor. The 5 men rose to their feet and stormed toward his table. One slammed his palm onto the table, sending wine spilling like blood across the pristine white cloth. The noise silenced the entire restaurant. "Who do you think you are, Hamilton?" the long-haired one growled. "You took everything from us, left us with nothing. Tonight you're going to pay." The air turned thick. Guests whispered nervously. A few pulled out their phones to record. Richard stayed seated, unfazed on the surface, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of caution. He was used to boardroom battles, but this was no negotiation. This was a fight, right in the middle of a luxury restaurant, and only Emma realized this was the moment everything was about to explode. She gripped the tray tighter, holding onto a secret no one in the room yet knew. The air inside the restaurant grew heavy, ready to burst. Guests sitting near Richard's table held their breath. Some pushed their chairs back to get away, while others stayed put, phones raised high, eyes gleaming at the thought of capturing a live drama on camera. Richard calmly set his wineglass down, dabbing the spilled red stain off his sleeve with a white napkin. He locked eyes with the long-haired man. Not with fear, but with the icy steadiness of someone who had stared down billion-dollar lawsuits before. "What do you want?" Richard asked slowly, his deep voice cutting through the silence of the entire room. "What do we want?" sneered the second man, pockmarked and bitter. He gave a harsh laugh. "We want you to taste defeat. You think you can steal everything from men like us and still live comfortably? Tonight, you'll be crawling on the ground like a dog." The group laughed cruelly, sending chills through the audience. Everyone thought the same thing. They were about to witness something horrific. A billionaire CEO beaten down in a fine dining restaurant. Near the bar, Emma stood frozen with her tray still in hand. Sweat dampened her forehead, but her sharp eyes never left the 5 men. Their movements, their stances, the way they spread out. It was all too familiar. She recognized it instantly. These weren't just angry men. These were trained fighters. Their fists, their footwork, every small detail screamed combat. The guests trembled, the staff panicked, and the restaurant manager frantically called security. But Emma knew the truth. Security would come too late. In seconds, Richard Hamilton would be lying on the floor, humiliated if no one stopped them. She drew in a deep breath. In that moment, Emma knew. It was time to reveal the secret she had kept hidden for so long. The five men's mocking laughter echoed across the room, shattering the elegant atmosphere of the restaurant. A woman gasped in terror as the long-haired brute grabbed Richard by the collar and yanked him out of his chair. Glasses clinked together, a few tumbling to the floor and smashing into shards. "Stand up, Hamilton!" the man growled, his breath reeking of liquor. "Let's see what the mighty billionaire looks like on his knees." Richard frowned but didn't resist. He knew better. Fighting back against five raging men would be nothing but a disaster. The room buzzed with fearful whispers. A few braver guests shouted, "Call the police!" But no one dared to step closer. Just a few steps away, Emma's hands trembled as she gripped the tray. Her eyes darkened, sharpening with resolve. She remembered the grueling years of training in a worn-out dojo. Every kick, every strike, every move she had thought she'd never need again. The pockmarked thug swung his fist straight at Richard's face. It all happened in a split second. But before the blow could land, a small figure darted in like a flash of wind. Smack! A sharp, clean sound cut through the silence. The thug's fist was frozen mid-air, and the one holding it was none other than Emma, the waitress everyone had ignored all night. Just another shadow in the restaurant. "That's enough!" Emma's voice rang out. Calm but ice-cold, the entire restaurant fell dead silent. No one could believe their eyes. A slim, unassuming waitress had stepped in front of five hulking men, and with a single move stunned an entire crowd. Richard's gaze shifted to Emma, his expression breaking for the first time, not from fear but from sheer astonishment, as if the danger around him momentarily disappeared. The entire room froze, every eye locked onto Emma, the once invisible waitress now standing in the spotlight of chaos. Some guests even forgot to breathe, their phones trembling in their hands as they tried to record. The pockmarked thug growled in frustration, yanking his hand back, but couldn't. Emma's grip was tight, precise, and controlled like that of a seasoned fighter. For a moment his massive hand trembled, caught in what felt like an iron vice. "Let go, you little brat!" another thug roared, lunging forward. Emma spun on her heel, the silver tray in her hand transforming into a weapon. Clang! The tray slammed against his shoulder with a sharp, ringing crack. The man staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief. The restaurant erupted in gasps and shouts. "Oh my God! She knows how to fight!" someone exclaimed. Richard stood there, stunned. A moment ago he had braced himself for humiliation. Now, he was witnessing something beyond belief. A frail waitress he had barely noticed all evening was standing between him and five menacing attackers, holding her ground like a warrior. The remaining four thugs rushed in together. Chairs toppled, tables crashed, screams echoed through the hall. But Emma moved like flowing water, swift, fluid, and unstoppable. A sweeping kick sent the shorter one sprawling. A sharp elbow strike forced the burly one to stumble backward, clutching his ribs. The guests were awestruck. Fear turned into excitement. Some even started clapping, cheering her on as if it were a live championship fight. Every move Emma made drew gasps of disbelief. Amid the chaos, Richard watched her closely, his lips curling into the faintest smile. For the first time, the cold CEO's eyes sparkled, not with fear but with fascination. "Who is this girl?" "Really?" Richard whispered. And that was the very question burning in the minds of everyone inside the restaurant that unforgettable night. After a few minutes of chaos, La Belle Étoile looked like it had survived a storm. Chairs were toppled over, broken glass littered the floor, and red wine stained the white tablecloths like splatters of blood. The five attackers lay groaning across the room, some clutching their ribs, others their shoulders, one still dazed from Emma's swift spin. Guests slowly regained their composure, whispers filling the air. "Unbelievable! She's just a waitress," one man murmured. Another quickly replied, "No, she's not just a waitress, she's a fighter." Emma stood tall, her breathing heavy but steady, her eyes unwavering. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her hands didn't shake. She had never wanted to expose that side of herself, but tonight her secret had been revealed in front of hundreds of eyes. Richard Hamilton calmly adjusted his collar, dabbing the last streak of wine from his sleeve with a napkin. He stepped closer, his sharp gaze locked on Emma. Unlike the cold stare he used in boardrooms, his eyes now carried something new, curiosity, and even admiration. "You are not like any waitress I've ever met," Richard said, his voice low yet commanding. Emma glanced at him, bowed her head slightly instead of answering, and picked up the bent silver tray, now dented from the impact, and quietly stepped aside. From outside, the distant sound of police sirens grew louder, closing in. The restaurant manager rushed to Richard, sweating nervously. "Mr. Hamilton, are you hurt? We are so sorry. We never imagined something like this could happen." But Richard didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Emma, as if trying to decode the mystery behind her calm face. In that moment, Richard Hamilton, the cold billionaire CEO of Wall Street, found himself gripped by a single question. Who is this waitress really? The wail of sirens echoed outside, and blue and red lights spilled across the restaurant's golden glow. Moments later, 3 police officers stormed in, followed by 2 hotel security guards who had arrived breathless. Guests rushed forward, all talking over one another, pointing at the 5 groaning men on the floor. A young officer scanned the scene and demanded, "What happened here?" Almost in unison, the guests pointed to Emma. Voices rang out, "She saved the billionaire!" The waitress took down all 5 thugs. Without her, Mr. Hamilton would have been finished. Emma bit her lip, her gaze shifting. She hated this spotlight, hated explaining. I just wanted to protect the guests and keep everyone safe," she said quietly, her voice calm, as if taking down 5 large men was nothing more than a routine task. But suspicion flickered in the officer's eyes, and whispers rippled among the guests. Then Richard Hamilton stepped forward, his deep, commanding voice cutting through the noise. "There's no need to drag this out. Without her, I would have been tonight's victim. Record my statement as such." The room fell silent. When a billionaire CEO like Richard Hamilton spoke, nobody dared argue. The officer gave a curt nod and signaled his men to cuff the 5 attackers. Meanwhile, Richard leaned closer to Emma, lowering his voice so only she could hear, "You just saved my life. But I don't believe this was just some reflex from an ordinary waitress. Who are you really, Emma?" Emma froze for a fraction of a second. The question pierced straight into the secret she'd hidden for years. Her eyes flickered with unease, but she quickly masked it with a faint smile. "I'm just a waitress, Mr. Hamilton, nothing more." Richard studied her, his brows furrowed slightly. He knew without a doubt that wasn't the truth, and he was determined to uncover it. The police left with the 5 attackers in cuffs, leaving the restaurant in disarray. Guests slowly dispersed, though some lingered in groups, whispering, their eyes still glued to Emma. The restaurant manager scrambled to apologize and order staff to clean up. But nothing could clear the strange atmosphere, an odd mix of tension, excitement, and disbelief. Emma lowered her head, picking up shards of broken glass from the floor, trying to look like just another ordinary waitress. Yet with every step she took, every stare she felt, she knew her secret could no longer remain hidden. Richard Hamilton hadn't moved. Hands in his pockets, he stood there observing her. He said nothing, but his sharp gaze tracked her every move like an investor dissecting an unpredictable deal. Finally, he walked forward, his polished shoes echoing until he stopped right in front of her. "You didn't have to do that," Richard said, his voice deep, though softer than before. "This wasn't your fight." Emma looked up, meeting his eyes briefly. They no longer carried the cold sharpness of a ruthless CEO, but something more unsettling. Concern. "For me," Emma replied. "Protecting the customers is part of the job." Richard's lips curved, not in mockery, but in something rare for him, a smile both intrigued and amused. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his tone. "Young lady, I owe you my life, and I'm not the kind of man who likes being in anyone's debt." Emma wanted to turn away, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. In that instant, she realized the real danger wasn't the 5 men who had just been arrested. The real danger stood before her, this billionaire, because he had power, money, and most dangerously, eyes sharp enough to pierce straight through the walls she had built for years. The restaurant gradually calmed, but Emma's mind was tangled in knots. All she wanted was to fade back into her routine, to disappear into the background as she always had. But that seemed impossible now, especially with Richard Hamilton still watching her, eyes never leaving. The restaurant manager hurried over, bowing low before Richard. "Mr. Hamilton, we sincerely apologize for tonight's incident. The restaurant will cover all costs of this evening. If you have any requests at all, My request," Richard interrupted, his gaze fixed firmly on Emma. "I want to know her name." The room went silent again. All eyes turned to Emma. She flinched slightly, then reluctantly answered, her voice soft. "Emma." Richard nodded, as if confirming something vital. Then he turned back to the manager. "Write it down. From now on, she serves me personally whenever I dine here. If that's not possible, I'll make my own arrangements." Emma's eyes widened. Words of protest caught in her throat. She felt as though she had just stepped into a trap she hadn't seen coming. Richard then pulled out a gold-embossed business card and placed it onto Emma's dented silver tray. His voice was steady, almost commanding. "If you ever need anything, call me. Don't refuse because I won't take no for an answer." The golden light of the restaurant cast across his calm yet piercing face. Emma stared at the gleaming card, its weight sinking into her chest, dangerous, suffocating, yet strangely stirring something within her heart. Deep down, Emma knew. From that moment on, the quiet life she had fought to protect was officially over. 2 days after the chaos at La Belle Étoile, the story of the waitress who took down 5 men spread across the city. The media hadn't picked it up yet, but videos filmed by diners had gone viral online. Everyone was talking about the mystery waitress, a slim, graceful girl who fought like a trained operative. Emma, meanwhile, tried to live as if nothing had happened. She showed up on time, tied her hair neatly, and served customers with her polite smile. But she knew people's eyes on her had changed. They now carried curiosity, admiration, even caution. She hated it. She wanted peace. But peace no longer existed, especially with the name Richard Hamilton looming. Richard wasn't the kind of man to let go of anything that intrigued him. In his glass-walled skyscraper office overlooking Wall Street, he leaned back in his chair, absently turning over one of his gold-embossed business cards, the same kind he had given Emma. Her image replayed in his mind, small yet unshakable, standing against 5 men, striking with precision, her eyes steady and fearless. "Emma," he muttered, as though her name itself had become a puzzle demanding to be solved. At once, he summoned his personal assistant, his voice firm. "I want every piece of information on a waitress named Emma who works at La Belle Étoile. Family past everything. As soon as possible." The assistant hesitated slightly. "Sir, should this be handled with complete discretion?" Richard's eyes sharpened, his tone cold and absolute. "Completely. No one outside of me is to know. And remember, I don't accept the words 'can't be found.'" Meanwhile, Emma ended her shift, walking down a quiet street at night. The wind tossed strands of hair across her forehead as she clutched her bag tightly. Though she tried to reassure herself, Emma could feel it deep down. Her ordinary life was over. Someone, and she knew it had to be Richard Hamilton, was beginning to unlock the past she had buried for so long. In Richard's skyscraper office, tension hung thick in the air. His private assistant, a sharp, middle-aged man named Collins, returned after nearly a full day of discreet investigation. He placed a thin folder on the CEO's desk. "Mr. Hamilton," Collins began cautiously, "I've looked into her, but things are stranger than I expected. Emma seems not to exist in any normal records." Richard lifted his gaze from the screen, his eyes sharp. "What do you mean, not exist?" Collins drew a breath and opened the folder. Inside were only a few scattered documents, a copy of her restaurant contract, a faint employee record with no official photo. Her paper trail begins just 2 years ago when Emma started working at La Belle Étoile. Before that, no school records, no permanent address, not even a clear social security number. It's as if she just appeared out of nowhere. Richard frowned, leaning back in his chair. For a man used to uncovering every secret in billion-dollar deals, the idea of a waitress leaving no trace was impossible. "Did you find anything outside the restaurant?" Richard pressed. Collins nodded slightly and produced an old, blurry photo. It showed a younger Emma in a martial arts uniform, standing in a small dojo, her eyes fierce and steady. This came from an old martial arts forum. Some members mentioned a promising female student who once won regional competitions. But then she vanished. No one ever heard of her again. Richard was silent, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the wooden desk. The memory of Emma that night replayed vividly. Her sharp movements, her cold focus, the unmistakable discipline of years of training. Martial arts, anonymity, Disappearance, Richard muttered. Then he fixed his gaze on Collins, his tone ironclad. Dig deeper. I want to know exactly who she is. And this time, Collins, don't come back empty-handed. Collins nodded, though unease flickered across his face. He knew that if Emma's past was truly complicated, digging it up could mean stirring a hornet's nest. Meanwhile, in a small suburban apartment, Emma sat alone in front of a mirror. She stared at her hands, still bearing faint scratches from the fight. In her eyes flickered a deep conflict between the quiet life she desperately wanted and a past that refused to stay buried. On Friday evening, La Belle Étoile glowed once again, just like any other night. Emma, after days of trying to blend back into her routine, walked the floor with a sense of unease. Every step felt watched. Some eyes admiring, some curious, some suspicious. She was arranging wine on her tray when a familiar presence stepped through the door. Navy suit, tall, confident stride, a faint smile tucked behind a cold expression. It was none other than Richard Hamilton. 2 bodyguards followed discreetly, but it was Richard's aura alone that silenced the entire room. Emma froze for a heartbeat. The last person she wanted to see had returned. Fate, it seemed, wasn't giving her a choice. The restaurant manager hurried forward, bowing low. "Mr. Hamilton! We're honored to have you again. As per your request, Emma will be your personal server tonight." Emma bit her lip. Any refusal would be pointless. With a quiet sigh, she steadied herself and walked toward the elegant table at the center where Richard had taken his seat. "Good evening." "Emma," Richard said smoothly, as though he had been expecting her all along. "What would you like to order, sir?" Emma replied, her tone professional, her face carefully unreadable. Richard studied her for a long moment, his gaze slicing through the walls she had built around herself. Then he said softly, "You know, I've met countless people in my life, politicians, lawyers, CEOs, even specially trained operatives. But none have intrigued me like you. You can't possibly be just a waitress." Emma set the menu gently on the table, her voice calm yet edged with steel. "Curiosity isn't always a good thing." "Mr. Hamilton!" Richard's lips curved in a half-smile. Part challenge, part fascination? Perhaps. But I've never been the kind of man who stops when faced with a mystery. In that moment, Emma felt as though she was standing before a dangerous chessboard. On one side, the past she fought to bury. On the other, a billionaire with enough power to uncover every secret. And whether she wanted it or not, the game had already begun. Dinner began, golden lights casting a soft glow over the elegant table. Richard Hamilton didn't rush to order. Instead, he sat upright, tapping a steady rhythm with his fingers on the polished wood, his eyes never leaving Emma. "How long have you been working here?" Richard asked casually, though his tone carried the weight of inquiry. "About 2 years," Emma answered shortly, fussing with the tablecloth as if keeping herself busy. "And before that?" Richard pressed, raising an eyebrow. Emma paused. Silence lingered for a beat. Then she smiled faintly, the kind of polite smile waitresses wear when a customer steps too far. "Just ordinary jobs, Mr. Hamilton. Nothing worth mentioning." Richard went quiet for a moment, then chuckled, a low sound, not loud but resonant like a challenge. Leaning forward slightly, his eyes gleamed like a hunter catching a trail. "Emma, I've heard hundreds of people say, 'nothing worth mentioning.' Every time, there's always a story. And I believe yours is far from ordinary." A knot tightened in Emma's chest. She kept her voice calm. "Sir, if you're ready to order, I'll notify the kitchen." Richard leaned back, gaze fixed on her, unwavering. He didn't push further, but his half-smile spoke louder than words. He wouldn't stop here. As Emma walked away to fetch the wine, Richard murmured under his breath, "Nothing worth mentioning? We'll see." Inside Emma's chest, her heartbeat thundered like a warning of the storm to come. She knew one thing with certainty. The game with Richard Hamilton had only just begun. That night, Emma returned to her small apartment in the suburbs, trying to convince herself it had been just another dinner shift. But deep down she knew. Richard Hamilton's eyes weren't the eyes of a diner. They were the eyes of an investigator, or worse, a predator who had caught the scent of hidden prey. The next morning, Emma started her shift early. With the restaurant still quiet, she took the chance to wipe tables and arrange glasses. Suddenly a figure appeared at the door, a tall middle-aged man in a wrinkled shirt, salt and pepper hair, eyes both weary and piercing. Emma froze. She knew him, all too well, the man she had tried to avoid for years. He stopped at the entrance, scanned the room, then fixed his gaze on Emma. A half-smile curved his lips, one that held no warmth. "Long time no see, Emily." The sound of that name made Emma stiffen. Her grip tightened on the cloth in her hand, but her voice stayed carefully calm. "You've mistaken me for someone else. My name is Emma," the man chuckled, low and rough. "Emma, Emily, or whatever name you're hiding behind? You can't run forever. I know exactly who you are, and I'm sure others would love to know, too." A chill shot down Emma's spine. She turned away quickly, just as Richard Hamilton entered the restaurant behind her. He had arrived in time to hear the man's final words. His eyes narrowed, glinting like a man who had just found a crucial missing piece. Richard's gaze flicked between Emma and the stranger, curiosity and challenge burning brighter than ever. Inside Emma, alarm bells rang loud. The past she had buried was breaking free, and Richard was right there, ready to witness it all. The air in the restaurant turned suffocatingly tense. Emma stepped back, masking her panic with calm composure. The man, the one who had called her Emily, still blocked the doorway, eyes gleaming with hidden meaning. Richard Hamilton entered, his two bodyguards halting just behind him. He didn't speak at first, slowly pulling off his leather gloves, his sharp gaze scanning from Emma to the stranger. "Interesting," Richard said evenly, his deep voice carrying. "I believe I just heard a name. Emily, wasn't it?" Emma bit her lip, clutching the tablecloth. "Mr. Hamilton, that was just a mistake." The man let out a raspy laugh, dragging the sound. "A mistake? Hardly. I trained her. I know exactly who she was, and what she was capable of. A wasted ace." Richard's brow arched instantly. He took one deliberate step forward, his voice cold as steel. "Trained? Who are you?" The man shrugged, his eyes defiant. "Let's just say I once had a promising student, and now it's amusing to see her serving wine instead of standing in the ring." Emma clenched her jaw, her voice sharp with tension. "That's enough. Leave now." Richard didn't take his eyes off Emma. His lips curled in a faint smile. In his mind, the pieces were starting to fit. The martial arts, the mysterious disappearance, and now, an old mentor. "Seems I was right," Richard murmured, just loud enough for Emma to hear. "You were never just a waitress." Emma's eyes flickered with helplessness. She knew, the more people revealed about her past, the faster her secret world would collapse. And the worst part was now undeniable. Richard Hamilton, a man who never let mysteries go unsolved, was already piecing her story together. The restaurant felt ready to explode. Other staff pretended to busy themselves with clearing tables, but in truth, they were holding their breath, watching. Emma stood caught between two forces, her old mentor, the man who had dragged her past back into the light, and Richard Hamilton, the billionaire who never let a secret slip away. The man smirked, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. "Emily, you can lie to the world, but not to me. I watched you bleed. I watched you fall and rise again. The ring was once your home." Emma clenched her fists, her voice low but firm. "That life is dead. I'm not Emily anymore." Richard tilted his head, studying her closely. He sat down in a nearby chair, fingers interlaced like a man settling in for a fascinating game of chess. "So you did have a past worth mentioning. I'd wager it wasn't just a few small competitions, was it, Emma? Or should I say, Emily?" Emma spun toward him, her glare sharp as a blade. "Mr. Hamilton, stay out of this." Richard chuckled softly, his amusement unhidden. "On the contrary, I think I'm right in the middle of it. A woman who saved my life turns out to be a hidden warrior. That's more interesting than any deal I've ever closed." The old man cut in bitterly. "She could have been a champion, but she chose to vanish, to run. The question is, why?" Silence fell heavy. Emma's chest heaved, her heartbeat pounding like war drums. Finally, she lifted her head, meeting both men's eyes. Her voice dropped, steady and resolute. "I owe no one an explanation. Not to you. Not to Mr. Hamilton. I just want to live quietly, do my job, nothing more." Richard leaned back, eyes glinting with curiosity and challenge. He didn't press, but his expression said it all. He wouldn't stop until he uncovered everything. The older man's gaze flickered with both sorrow and anger. He muttered under his breath, "You can run, Emily, but you'll never escape." Emma swallowed hard, the weight of invisible chains tightening around her, and she knew, from this moment on, every path ahead would lead straight into the storm she had fought so long to avoid. After the man left, the restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm, but for Emma, each fading step of his felt like an echo haunting her mind. She stood frozen for a moment, her hands gripping the cloth so tightly her knuckles turned white. Richard Hamilton remained seated, his eyes locked on her. He said nothing at first, watching with the patience of a predator waiting for its prey to falter. At last his voice cut through the silence, low, deliberate. "One thing is certain. I was right. You are a mystery, and I won't stop until I solve it." Emma turned to him, her gaze icy. "Mr. Hamilton, you have power, wealth, the world at your feet. But not everything belongs to you. I am not a deal for you to close." For a heartbeat, Richard paused. Then he let out a quiet laugh, a smile both intrigued and challenged. "Perhaps. But that only makes me more determined to know why someone like you chose to hide in the shadows. The bigger the secret, the greater its worth, Emma." She pressed her lips together, refusing to answer. Inside, unease flooded her chest. She knew, the more she resisted, the more relentless Richard would become. And worse still, his eyes didn't just carry curiosity anymore. They carried admiration, fascination. As Richard rose to leave, he set another business card on her tray. This time he leaned in with a murmur. "Remember, sooner or later, you'll need me." His figure disappeared into the night, leaving Emma alone in the dim glow of the restaurant. Her heart pounded, not just with fear or anger, but with something else she couldn't deny, a dangerous flicker of emotion she hadn't felt in years. Night fell, neon lights painting the city in bright colors. But inside Emma's small apartment, everything was cloaked in uneasy silence. She sat on a chair, staring at the gold-embossed business card Richard Hamilton had left behind. For years, she had trained herself to stay away from power, to hide from any spotlight that might expose her secrets. Yet now, one man, with just a few words, had cracked the armor she had spent years building. Her phone buzzed. A new message lit up the screen. "You can't run forever, Emily. The past will find you, whether you like it or not." Emma's grip tightened around the phone, her heartbeat racing. Her old mentor was still watching, and Richard, with his lethal curiosity, was closing in from the other side. She felt trapped between two fires. The past she desperately wanted to bury, and the piercing gaze of a billionaire who never let mysteries slip away. Meanwhile, on the top floor of Hamilton Tower, Richard sat through a board meeting. Numbers, reports, billion-dollar contracts passed before his eyes. But his mind remained elsewhere, fixated on the image of a waitress with cold eyes and strikes as sharp as blades. When the meeting ended, Richard stood at the glass window, gazing out over Wall Street's lights. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he muttered, "Emma, or Emily, I don't care what your name is. I only know one thing. I've never walked away from something that intrigued me. And you're the biggest deal of my life." Across the city, Emma sat alone, eyes closed tight. She knew peace had abandoned her. The real storm was on its way. The next morning, as Emma stepped into the restaurant, she immediately sensed something was off. Whispers followed her. Curious stares trailed her every move. It didn't take long for her to see why. A tabloid had published a sensational headline. "Mysterious waitress takes down 5 men in upscale restaurant. Who is she really?" The article was accompanied by stills from the viral video. Emma's face was clear. Her tied-back hair, her cold gaze, her sharp spin kick captured perfectly in frame. Her hands tightened around the paper, heart pounding faster. Sweat dampened her palms. Everything she had worked to hide was leaking out, bit by bit. "Emma." The restaurant manager called, his face drawn tight with worry. "We've had dozens of phone calls. Reporters, even some people claiming to be your former teammates. You need to explain this. What is going on?" Emma froze. She couldn't tell the truth, but she couldn't deny it either. Just then her phone buzzed. A new text from an unknown number. "We need to meet. Otherwise, your past goes public." Emma swallowed hard. The storm she had dreaded for years had finally arrived. Across the city, inside his opulent office, Richard Hamilton held the same newspaper in his hands. He leaned back, a half-smile curving across his lips. "Your secret is unraveling piece by piece, and I'll be the one to complete the puzzle." That night, Emma slipped out of the restaurant through the back door, a thin coat pulled tight around her face. The text demanding a meeting clung to her mind like a shadow. She knew, if she didn't confront it, her past would be dragged into the open, and that was the one thing she feared most. The meeting place was an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. When Emma stepped inside, flickering neon lights cast a sickly glow across the cold concrete floor. Her old mentor, the middle-aged man, was already waiting. "So you came, Emily," he said, his raspy voice heavy. "I knew you couldn't keep running forever." Emma drew a deep breath, her eyes sharp as blades. "Why are you dragging me back into this? I left it all behind. The ring, the tournaments, the fights. I'm not that person anymore." The man stepped closer, his gaze burning with both sorrow and anger. "You think you can erase your past? They're coming for you, Emily, not just me. The ones you beat, the ones who want to use you, they will all find you soon enough." Emma stayed silent, but her hands clenched, veins rising against her skin. Deep down she knew he was right. The past never disappears. It waits, and when it returns it comes back stronger. Just then a faint sound echoed from the door. Emma spun around, her heart skipping a beat. Richard Hamilton entered. Tall, commanding, his sharp eyes glinting in the dim light. "Apologies for intruding," Richard said, his voice low and cold. "But I couldn't possibly miss a meeting like this. You may hide your past from others, Emma, but you won't hide it from me." Emma's eyes widened, shock and fury colliding inside her. In that moment, she realized the walls had closed in. The past and the present had cornered her together. The warehouse air froze. Rain pattered on the tin roof, amplifying the tension. Emma stood between them, fists clenched, her eyes darting from Richard Hamilton to her old mentor. The older man spoke first, cutting straight through the walls Emma had built. "Emily was my best student. She had the chance to be a national champion, maybe even more. But one fight changed everything." Emma narrowed her eyes, her voice tight. "Don't bring that up." Richard, calm as ever, stepped in like a CEO dissecting a billion-dollar deal. "A fight, then. So that's the past you're hiding. That explains why you could dismantle 5 men in seconds." The mentor nodded grimly. "Not just a fight that ended with a man dead." From that day on, Emily vanished. Emma drew in a sharp breath, her chest tightening painfully. In that instant her first secret was out. Richard's eyes locked onto her, sharp yet blazing with raw fascination. "So," Richard said slowly, "you once carried death into the ring." "No." Emma's voice cracked, echoing through the warehouse. "It wasn't my fault. I tried to save him, but it spun out of control." Richard remained silent, his gaze fixed. For the first time, he saw her walls break, revealing a wound buried deep. Her mentor folded his arms, eyes heavy with sorrow and sternness. "You can deny it all you want, but that truth will follow you, and sooner or later others will find it too." Emma turned away, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes, but her voice carried steel. "I'm not Emily anymore. I won't let my past define me." Richard's lips curved, faint but deliberate. In his mind, a plan was already forming. He had secured the first piece of the puzzle, and he wouldn't stop until he had them all. The next day, the city sky was heavy and gray, clouds thick as if warning of an oncoming storm. Emma still forced herself to report for work at La Belle Étoile, but her heart was far from calm. The threatening texts, Richard's piercing gaze at the warehouse, and her past dragged into the open. She felt like she was walking a tightrope above a chasm. And Richard Hamilton appeared again, just as she feared. But this time he came alone. No bodyguards, no spectacle. He sat at a table by the window, staring out at the street with the composure of a king who had just calculated his next great move. Emma reluctantly approached and set down a cup of coffee. "Mr. Hamilton, only coffee today?" Richard looked up, offering a faint smile. "Today I'm not here to eat. I'm here to talk." Emma stiffened. "I have nothing to say." Richard tilted his head, his voice calm yet commanding. "Really? After your secret started leaking in the papers, after your old mentor showed up, you still think you can stay silent and live like a simple waitress?" "Emma, the world doesn't work that way. Once blood stains the ring, it never disappears." Emma clenched her fists. "I don't want anything to do with that world anymore." Richard leaned back, his eyes glinting with determination. "Perhaps you don't, but others do?" The ones from your past are hunting you. And if you stand alone, they'll crush you. But me?" He paused, his tone dropping low. "I can protect you. In return, I want the truth." "All of it." Emma stared at Richard. In that moment, she realized. This billionaire wasn't just curious. He was a strategist, a man who always won on the board of power. And now she, with all her secrets and scars, had become the special piece he was determined to control. Emma stood frozen, her eyes locked on Richard. She could hear her heartbeat hammering in her chest, each thud a warning. Richard Hamilton, the man who kept Wall Street on edge, now sat across from her, offering protection in exchange for the truth. But Emma knew nothing came free, especially from a man like him. "Mr. Hamilton," Emma said evenly, though her hand trembled slightly beneath the tray. "I don't need anyone's protection. I can take care of myself." Richard chuckled, short and resonant. He leaned forward, his gaze sharp as a blade. "You can take down 5 men in seconds, yes. But what about the others? The ones who don't just fight with fists, but with power, money, entire underground networks. How long do you think you can stand alone against them?" Emma bit her lip. She knew he was right, yet her heart resisted. Telling him the truth meant unlocking the door to the past she had sealed shut. Richard pressed on, his voice low but heavy with weight. "You can stay silent. Keep running. But sooner or later, the past will knock on your door. And when it does, I fear you won't be the only one to pay the price." His words made Emma falter. A fleeting image crossed her mind. The innocent faces at the old dojo, the teammates who once called her sister. If enemies found them, her fists clenched tighter. She raised her head, meeting Richard's gaze. In her eyes now flickered not only caution but a trace of unease, maybe even wavering. "What do you want from me?" Emma asked, her voice rough. Richard's lips curled into a smile, both confident and predatory. "Not much. Just the whole story, so I know exactly who I'm protecting." Emma said nothing. Standing at this crossroads, she felt as though she was being drawn into a dangerous game of power, where every wrong move could drag her into the abyss. Emma hadn't even answered when the restaurant doors burst open. 3 unfamiliar men strode in, trench coats hanging loose, eyes sharp as knives. They weren't here to dine. No seats, no menus. They headed straight for the bar, the very spot Emma had stood just minutes earlier. The air grew heavy. Waiters backed away, diners whispered nervously. Emma recognized their walk, their eyes, even the way they spread out. It was all too familiar. These weren't random thugs. They were men from her past. The tallest one sat at the bar, slamming his palm down with a smirk. "Emma, or should I say Emily?" "Been a long time." Emma froze, her chest tightening. From a nearby table, Richard arched an eyebrow. He had expected this might happen, but not so soon. "You've mistaken me," Emma replied calmly, though her hand clenched tight beneath her apron. The man tilted his head, chuckling darkly. "Mistaken? No, we came to remind you. Blood debts don't just vanish." A chair screeched across the floor. Another man stood, deliberately knocking over a bottle of expensive wine. Glass shattered, spilling red across the floor like blood. The room fell silent, every eye locked on them. Richard set his coffee cup down and slowly rose to his feet. He didn't speak, but his gaze swept coldly across the intruders before settling on Emma. His eyes burned with a silent challenge. "Show me who you really are." Emma drew in a sharp breath. There was no more room for hesitation. Her buried instincts roared back to life. As the thug reached to grab her arm, Emma spun with lightning speed. Crash! The man slammed onto the floor, gasping in pain as diners screamed. The restaurant erupted in chaos, and in an instant, a new battle had begun. Chairs crashed, screams erupted, glass shattered. The restaurant became a battlefield. The 3 remaining men lunged at Emma like enraged wolves. Diners scattered in panic, though many stayed. Phones raised, desperate to capture the once-in-a-lifetime scene. Emma inhaled sharply, her body slipping back into the rhythm of long-forgotten training. One thug swung a fist like a hammer. Emma sidestepped, seized his arm, and twisted hard. The crack of bone made the entire room flinch. "Hoo!" he howled, collapsing onto the floor. The second man, quicker, leapt to lock her in a chokehold. But Emma pivoted, dropped her weight, and launched him over her shoulder. He crashed across a table, shattering a chair beneath him. Gasps and cries filled the restaurant, mingled with shouts of awe. Richard stood still, hands in his pockets, eyes razor-sharp. He didn't intervene. He simply observed every strike, every counter, like a strategist studying an opponent's every move. And on his lips curved the faintest smile, part astonishment, part delight. The last thug pulled a gleaming knife, its blade flashing under the restaurant lights. Diners shrieked. "Oh my God, he's got a knife!" Emma's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with resolve. She didn't back away. As the man lunged, the blade inches from her skin, she spun, striking his wrist in a lightning move, then drove her foot into his stomach. The knife clattered to the ground with a metallic clang. The man collapsed, gasping on the floor. Emma stood tall, chest heaving, eyes sweeping over the three defeated men. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then the room erupted in cheers, applause, and terrified murmurs. Richard stepped forward, his gaze locked on her. His voice cut through the noise, low but certain. "You can't deny it anymore, Emma. The past has found you. And now? I've seen exactly who you really are." Emma turned away, her hands trembling slightly. She knew that from this moment on, all her defenses had crumbled. Not just Richard, but the outside world was beginning to witness Emily reborn. The next morning, the entire city seemed to know the name of the mystery waitress. The media exploded. Clips of Emma taking down three men in the restaurant spread across social media at lightning speed. Sensational headlines dominated the news. Who is the waitress who took down a gang in an upscale restaurant? Emily, the hidden name behind a warrior's past. Emma sat silently in her small apartment, her phone buzzing nonstop. Reporters, strangers, even familiar voices from her old dojo. She switched it off, burying her head in her hands, heart heavy. Peace was gone. Forever. Meanwhile, high above the city in Hamilton Tower, Richard Hamilton stood at the glass window, coffee in hand, watching the river of people below. His aide Collins entered with a stack of morning papers. "Sir, Emma has become the center of attention. The media is in a frenzy. Some corporations are even reaching out, asking if she'd be interested in brand endorsements." Richard smirked faintly. "Not surprising. People always crave a hero or a villain to tear down. And Emma, she's just ignited both." Collins hesitated. "What do you intend to do?" Richard turned, his eyes cold yet burning with resolve. "I won't let the world devour her. Emma belongs to me, whether she admits it or not. If her past is unraveling, then I'll be the one to stand beside her, to control the narrative." Across the city, Emma stared into the mirror. Her eyes were tired, her face tense, but deep within, a small flame was beginning to burn. She knew she could no longer run, and the next battle might not only be against her old enemies, but against Richard Hamilton, the most dangerous man now stepping into her life. That afternoon, Emma reluctantly returned to the restaurant. She intended to slip in quietly, just another shift, but things had spiraled far beyond her control. The moment she stepped off the bus, a wall of reporters swarmed the entrance of La Belle Étoile. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved in her face, voices fired like arrows. "Were you really a fighter? Is it true you killed a man in an underground match? What's your connection to Richard Hamilton?" Emma froze, overwhelmed. The questions pierced through her fragile calm. She stumbled back, heart pounding, as memories of that fateful fight resurfaced, making her knees weaken. Just then, a sleek, black car pulled up. Its door swung open, and Richard Hamilton stepped out, clad in a charcoal suit, tall and commanding. He silenced the crowd with a single glance. He walked straight to Emma, slipping an arm around her shoulders with ease, as though they'd known each other intimately for years. "Apologies, but she won't be taking questions today. If you have inquiries, direct them to my office." His words landed like law. The reporters murmured, but none dared block him. Richard guided Emma firmly through the crowd and into the restaurant. Once inside, Emma yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing. "You have no right to interfere in my life like that." Richard only smiled, unfazed. "Perhaps not, but you'll thank me soon. The media is a beast. Face it alone, and they'll tear you apart within a day. With me, I can turn you into a story they can't control." Emma clenched her fists. She knew he wasn't wrong. But the way Richard's hand had rested on her shoulder before the cameras stirred something dangerous in her chest. Anger, confusion, and a flicker of something she didn't want to admit. That evening, every major news station covered the same story. Richard Hamilton, seen with mystery waitress at La Belle Étoile. Wall Street billionaire publicly sponsors viral restaurant heroine. In the broadcast, the clip of Richard's arm around Emma's shoulders replayed on a loop. Commentators speculated wildly, some insisting she was his secret lover, others claiming Richard intended to make her the face of some massive business venture. Emma sat before the TV, her face burning. She gripped the remote tightly, anger and helplessness churning inside her. In a single night, she was no longer just Emma, the ordinary waitress. The world had assigned her a new identity she never asked for. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Collins, Richard's personal aide. His voice was calm but firm. "Miss Emma, Mr. Hamilton requests your presence at a press conference tomorrow. He intends to officially announce his sponsorship of you, so the media can no longer twist the story." Emma snapped. "I never agreed to that." "You don't have to agree," Collins replied. "But if you don't appear, the press will treat your silence as a confession. Mr. Hamilton believes this is the only way to turn the tide." Emma hung up, her heart in turmoil. She hated Richard for throwing her into the storm, but deep down, she knew he was also shielding her from being devoured alive by the media. At Hamilton Tower, Richard watched the evening news with a calm expression. When Collins entered, Richard spoke only one line. "Tomorrow, Emma will stand beside me. Whether she wants to or not, I'll make her the story the world hears, on my terms." The next day, the glare of dozens of cameras lit up the press conference stage. The Grand Hall of Hamilton Tower was packed with reporters. Lenses aimed squarely at a podium set against a backdrop of the Hamilton Group logo. The atmosphere was tense, like a public trial. Richard Hamilton stepped out first, walking with effortless confidence, his suit immaculate. He raised a hand, and the murmurs in the room hushed instantly. In his deep, commanding voice, he began, "Thank you all for being here. I know everyone has heard about the incident at La Belle Étoile. Today, I want to end the baseless speculation and introduce the real woman behind this story." The room buzzed. Emma emerged, the barrage of flashbulbs nearly blinding her. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. Richard guided her firmly to the podium, his hand resting lightly but firmly on her back. A silent declaration. "She stands with me." "This is Emma," Richard continued. "She is not a criminal, not some underground legend as the tabloids suggest. She is an ordinary woman who, when forced to choose, acted with extraordinary courage to protect others, including myself." Reporters erupted, hands shooting into the air. One man shouted above the rest, "Emma, rumors say you fought in underground tournaments, that a man even died in one of your matches. Is that true?" The hall fell silent. Every camera locked onto Emma. Her breath caught. Richard cut in swiftly, his tone sharp as steel. "That question is out of line and irrelevant. Today's story isn't about tired old rumors. It's about the courage the world has already seen with their own eyes." Then he paused, turning toward Emma with a faint, encouraging smile. "And I believe she can tell the rest herself." Emma froze. In that moment, she knew there was no more running. Before hundreds of cameras, she had to choose silence, denial, or admitting part of the truth to seize control of her own story. Flashbulbs exploded, reporters shouted like a storm. Emma stood at the podium, her hands tightening unconsciously, her chest heavy, as if weighed down by stone. The question about a deadly fight echoed in her mind, threatening to rip open everything she had tried to bury. Richard Hamilton stood just behind her, his gaze sharp as a blade, pressure and encouragement in equal measure. He had thrust her into the storm, but also handed her the chance to seize back control. Emma drew a deep breath, steadying her voice. "I know there are many rumors about me, and no, I won't deny that I was once a fighter. That is part of my past, a part I tried to hide because it carries pain." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in tight on her face. "There was one fight that changed everything. I lost a friend, an opponent I never meant to hurt. From that day, I walked away from the ring and chose another life. I am not Emily anymore. I am Emma, a woman who just wants to live quietly and who refuses to let violence define her." For a moment, the hall was still. Some reporters lowered their microphones, others scribbled frantically, but the most important shift was in the eyes of the public. no longer seeing Emma as a dangerous enigma, but as a scarred, real person, a woman with a past and with loss. Richard smiled faintly, resting a hand on Emma's shoulder, not as possession this time, but as affirmation she had just won a greater fight. As soon as Emma finished, the hall erupted. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust at her, cameras flashing non-stop. Some applauded, calling her a brave woman who dared to own her past. But shouts also rang from the corners of the room. If you killed someone, how can you claim innocence? What else are you hiding from us? The public split in two. News exploded across TV and social media, drawing millions of comments. Some hailed Emma as proof that people can change. Others condemned her, demanding she pay for her sins. Backstage, Emma collapsed into a chair, sweat soaking her back. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes glimmered with relief. For the first time, she wasn't running anymore. Richard entered, sitting across from her. He studied her a moment, then said quietly, "You just did what few dare to do. You turned your past into your weapon. From now on, no one can use it against you." Emma lifted her gaze, doubt flickering in her eyes. "And what about the ones who won't stop?" Just then, Collins rushed in, his face tight, handing Richard an envelope. He opened it to reveal a grainy photo, Emma in her old jai, standing in the middle of an underground ring, eyes blazing. Below it, scrawled in rough handwriting, "You can fool the world, but not us. This time we're coming." Emma froze, her heart pounding. Richard gripped the photo, his eyes narrowing as his voice dropped low. "Seems the past isn't just knocking anymore. It's broken down the door." The backstage air grew thick, as though the noise outside had been cut off. Emma stared at the photo in Richard's hand, her breath uneven. It wasn't just a picture. It was a warning that those she tried to forget were still alive, and now they were hunting her. Richard set the photo on the table, his eyes blazing. He leaned toward her, his voice low and resolute. "Listen to me, Emma. This is no longer about the press. If they're coming for you, they won't stop until you're destroyed. And trust me, they don't just want you. They want to use you as a symbol, to shake the entire underworld." Emma bit her lip, her fists trembling. Part of her wanted to stand and run, to disappear as she had before. But another part, the one she had buried for years, was stirring, urging her not to bow ever again. "So what do you suggest?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Richard smiled faintly, sharp and calculating. "Simple. They want to hunt you? Then we make them show themselves. But to do that you need me. I have the resources, the power, the media. And you? You have skills no one else can match." Emma let out a dry laugh. "You're talking about an alliance? Me and you, a disgraced fighter, and a cold-blooded billionaire?" Richard tilted his head, eyes locked on hers. "Call it whatever you want. The truth is this, either you work with me or the past swallows you whole, and this time no one will save you. Not even yourself." Silence pressed in. Emma met Richard's gaze, the eyes of a man who had never lost a game. She realized he didn't just want to protect her. He wanted to control the board. But in this moment, did she really have another choice? The small backstage room was so quiet Emma could hear the ticking clock on the wall. The photo on the table burned in her vision, a reminder that whether she wanted it or not, the past had returned. And this time, it wasn't leaving. Richard sat across from her, calm as ever, like a chess master waiting for the decisive move. His gaze was steady, unblinking, as though certain Emma could not refuse. Emma drew a deep breath, her chest tight. Part of her screamed, "Don't! Don't let him control you like a pawn." But another voice whispered, "If you don't, you'll be crushed. And this time, there's no escape." Slowly, she raised her head, eyes sharp, her voice low but resolute. "Fine, I'll work with you. But understand this, Hamilton. I'm not your property, and I'm not your pawn. If you think you can control me, you'll regret it." For a moment's silence. Then Richard laughed softly, a deep sound tinged with delight. He nodded, as though Emma had played the very move he'd been waiting for. "Perfect. I don't need to control you, Emma. I just need you on my side. Leave the rest to me." Emma held his gaze, turmoil swirling inside her. She knew she had just signed a dangerous pact, an alliance with the most powerful, most ambitious man she had ever met. Yet a part of her also realized, if she wanted to defeat the ghosts of her past, this might be her only path. Outside, the press roared, the world watching her every step. And from this moment on, Emma was no longer the mystery waitress. She had officially entered a grand game, where her past, her future, and Richard Hamilton himself were entangled in a ruthless battle she could no longer avoid.